Hello, today's master plan is simple. We're going to be talking about Mick Schumacher and how good he could be in Formula One, because as we all know, Mick Schumacher, the son of the great Michael Schumacher, there's going to be quite obviously a lot of pressure, a lot of expectation for him in his career. But today we're going to go for a deep dive and kind of analyze how good he could actually be in the sport. Because whilst he had an impressive junior career, I believe that Mick Schumacher might not be as good as some people expect him to. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing that we're going to go over here in this kind of analysis is his Formula 2 career, which, whilst good, was by no means extraordinary. Now, I want to say this first off. He deserves to be in F1. If you win Formula 2 and there's a seat available, as there was at Haas, I think that he deserved a shot in Formula 1. But with that said, his F2 form was not as sensational, it was not as breathtaking as the likes of Charles Leclerc and George Russell. And I'm sure, as we all know, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, first year in F2, bang, they won it. Mick Schumacher was a bit different. His first year in Formula 2, he was really just, took him a long while to kind of find his feet. He finished, I think it was P12. It wasn't a great year for him. But the second year, last year, 2020, he of course won it. Now, of course, you have to give him credit for winning the championship. It was a very strong year for him, and it kind of guaranteed himself a seat in F1. But with all that said, there are still other people in that year who probably showed more raw pace than Mick Schumacher. Yuki Tsunoda, who last year was an F2, he finished third, only 10 points behind Mick, and it was Yuki's first year in Formula 2. So you can really quite easily make the case that Yuki Tsunoda had more pace and was more exciting in Formula 2 last year. And even the likes of Robert Schwartzman, he was very close in the championship battle until the final few rounds where he kind of made a few mistakes and faded away. But the point I'm trying to get across to you is that whilst Mick Schumacher did well in Formula 2, there isn't anything yet to suggest that he's going to be a world beater. And I only bring this up because Ferrari, as we all know, have got a very, very, very strong driver lineup. Number one, you have Charles Leclerc, who is Ferrari's golden boy, their main man, lack of a better term. And he has a contract with them until 2024, and quite frankly, if he wins a championship between now and then, I can't see him wanting to leave unless something goes very horribly wrong. Because he's a Ferrari boy through and through. Ferrari know how good he is. We've seen how quick he is in the last couple of seasons. So I think that Leclerc is a lock to stay at the team for at least 3 or 4 more years. And alongside him, we have Carlos Sainz, who it must be said has impressed many people. Now, if we go back to last season, if we go back to June, when it was first announced that Carlos Sainz would leave McLaren for Ferrari, there was obviously a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. But many, many people, including myself, were kind of thinking, is this the right move? Because Carlos Sainz went from a team at McLaren where he was really the number one, more or less, to Ferrari where most people thought that he'd be the kind of traditional number two driver. But with that said, he's been very, very impressive this year. Arguably, out of the likes of Ricardo, Vettel, Alonso, he's adapted the quickest to his new team, and he's had a very impressive season. He is currently just 2 points behind Leclerc, and while of course Leclerc has had bad luck, as we saw in Monaco for example, that was partly self-inflicted, and just aside from that, I think that Sainz has been very, very impressive this year. And I bring this up because Mick Schumacher will have to do something very, very special to prove that he's good enough to get into Ferrari. And whilst I think that Ferrari, in their heart of hearts, want to have Mick Schumacher in Ferrari, and it might be inevitable that at some point Mick makes the jump to that team, I just think that he may not be good enough to get there. And I know that this could be an unpopular opinion. Many people expect Mick to go to Ferrari and lead the team like his father, but I haven't quite seen enough yet. And one thing which I think will be important for Mick in his kind of future aspirations at Ferrari is that he might need to beat a better teammate than Nikita Mazepin. Because whilst, of course, right now he's doing quite well, he's battering Nikita, and he's had a very solid first half of the season, or first third of the season so far, first 9 rounds. Ultimately, it is Nikita Mazepin. We can't really compare him to anybody else in the grid because Nikita, if we're being honest, is probably the worst driver in F1. I'm not trying to, beat somebody while they're down, but you could argue that only Latifi is comparable to Mazepin in terms of skill. And frankly, that might be a bit rude to Latifi to compare him to Mazepin. So the point I'm trying to make here is we have to see him against an established F1 driver, whether it's, I don't know, Stroll, Giovinazzi, Kimi, whoever. You have to see him against somebody who we kind of have an idea of their pace. Because right now, no matter what he does at Haas, it's quite hard to really pin him compared to everyone else. This is a similar issue that I have with George Russell. I have no doubt that he's very, very good, but given that his teammate is Latifi, it's hard to say exactly how good he is. But for Mick, this is a slightly bigger issue because Haas is even worse than Williams. So, as for example, with George Russell, we saw him fighting for points last weekend. With Mick Schumacher, the best he can really do is finish P17 ahead of his teammate. So that's why I think it's going to be very hard for him to get into Ferrari in F1. And I think another issue that he has is that, as I mentioned earlier, there are other Ferrari juniors that arguably have shown more potential. Callum Ilott, for example. Even though, yes, Mick Schumacher did beat Ilott in F2 last year, if you actually look at the feature races and just the overall championship, Ilott, even Schwartzman had a more raw pace. Mick Schumacher didn't get a single pole position last year in F2. And again, I'm not trying to take his F2 win again away from him, but for me, last year in F2, he showed more maturity than speed, and that's a great thing. But ultimately, in F1, you need speed first, and then maturity, kind of racecraft second. And I feel as though there are other Ferrari juniors like Callum Ilott, who, if he gets a chance at Alfa Romeo, could impress. But aside from Ilott, who's kind of in a very difficult place right now, Robert Schwartzman, currently in F2. If he wins F2 and gets up into F1, I think that makes life very, very difficult for Mick. Because if Robert goes to Alfa Romeo and Mick stays at Haas and Haas continue to be as average as they are, then Robert Schwartzman might seem a far more kind of viable, or at least a far more exciting prospect for Ferrari. So as I say, I just wanted to give my thoughts on Mick and really his future in the sport. I think he will be a good driver, a solid midfield driver. But for me, when you compare him to the likes of Leclerc and Sainz of Ferrari, and just in general the overall grid at the moment with, the likes of Norris, etc., etc., I just can't see him being at that top level. Of course, he is young and he will improve. But for me, if I had to guess and if I had to give my prediction, I don't think he will be as good as some people expect. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be going live later on, so be sure to tune in for that. And yeah, I'll be doing daily uploads. So subscribe if you're new, like the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.